You're tuning in to Wellfound's Ask a Recruiter, where we sit down with recruiters to share their advice on the hiring process. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel. I'm from the product support team here at Wellfound. I'm just going to wait a minute for a few more people to roll in. We're getting a bunch of people being admitted from the waiting room all at once. Today's topic for our Ask a Recruiter Q&A is negotiating compensation with high growth startups. And our guest speaker is Hilary Gardner. She is the Director of Talent Acquisition at Inspiren. And we're really excited to have her here with us. I'm going to give her a proper intro, but while everyone rolls in, I'm just going to go over a couple of things for the group. So the first thing I'm going to go over is just like how the questions are going to work during this session. So we're going to start with intake survey questions. These are all questions from you from when you signed up. Hilary chose 5 that we thought would be like a really great intro to the subject, and also ones that didn't like overlap a lot. We got lots of overlapping questions. But while we're going over those initial questions, feel free to write your extra questions into the chat. As long as they're not the ones that we already chose, I will pick up on them when we get to the live question session. And if you can, it's really helpful to me if you indicate if you would like to read them out loud or if you would like me to ask it for you. If you don't, I'm just going to ask you if you want to read out loud. I love to hear people's voices on these calls. And then while we're doing the live questions section, you can also raise your hand. So at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, you're going to see a raise your hand, like it's like a yellow hand emoji that you can use to actually like show me that you'd like to ask a question out loud, and I'll call on you. The last thing that we ask is to please be respectful. We are a community. We've done about 10 of these now. And it's a really great opportunity to even meet other job seekers who might be at future companies that you'll work at. And Hilary has also been really generous with her time. So we just want to be respectful and thoughtful with the questions that we're asking today. So just in case anybody is joining that doesn't know what Wellfound is, Wellfound is a jobs marketplace platform. We were formerly called AngelList Talent. We've been around for about 10 years, and we specialize in getting you hired by cutting edge startups. But that also is more inclusive and includes, tech enterprise companies as well now. We have made over 8 million matches and have over 150,000 tech jobs in our system. And we're just like a great place to find jobs for tech companies. Myself, and you'll see Megan, Alejandro, and Senya are all also on the call. We're all representatives of Wellfound. We're the people that you'd write to if you ever need help. We're real people that want to help you. So if you write to us at talent@wellfound.com, we're happy to like guide you through your application process. So on to the good stuff. Now that we've got participants that have fully arrived, I want to introduce Hilary Gardner. Like I said, she's the Director of Talent Acquisition at Inspiren. Hilary has more than a decade of experience honing her recruitment leadership skills across a number of tech sectors, including gaming, ad tech, music tech, fintech, and now health tech. As the current Director of Talent Acquisition at Inspiren, Hilary's work focuses on developing and implementing strategies to attract and retain the best and brightest individuals, successfully expanding companies' talent pools to ensure maximum impact. Throughout her career at SoundCloud, Adaptly, and GREE International, she has built high-performing teams and trained executives on non-biased interview practices. Her strategic talent acquisition approach has been instrumental in scaling numerous high-growth tech companies. Hilary, we're so excited that you're here with us today.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm excited to be here. And I know I've worked for some pretty interesting titles of companies, and it's GREE International and Inspiren. So
Inspiring.
those are my two wonky words, but you got everything else right. You're doing great, Rachel.
Great.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to kick this off. I have a little blurb before we get into questions, just to kind of level set and to understand what is negotiating for compensation. So the biggest factor in negotiation is knowledge. Where are you in terms of your current compensation? How many years of experience do you have? Do you have proven tenure, which I know is really tricky given post-COVID? There's a lot of hoppy sort of situations. What can you speak to understand your career arc? What's your story? What is your worth or value? How do you bring this to a company who's excited about you who might even care about you, but let's be real, they don't have your best interest at heart. You have to have your best interest at heart. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to understand what your worth is in the economy, essentially. And also, what are you bringing to the table and what are you taking from the table? So, most startups have a base and equity level set where they're tied to ranges for those job families or functions. They may or may not have a compensation philosophy depending on how old they are as a startup or how advanced they are. They might even be looking to the market, to you as candidates, to understand like what is a BI analyst in Omaha, Nebraska making? We only have New York numbers. It really varies. So don't trust the company as much as you think their offer is going to give you what you want. Understand what you need going into that. So, how do you find this? Glassdoor has great sort of crowdsource numbers. It's not a source of truth, it's crowdsourced. So, it's Reddit basically. Also, look at Reddit. Job descriptions in regions that are similar to yours in New York, California, Colorado, and I believe Massachusetts all have to legally post their job compensation ranges on job descriptions. Now, it's not Bible, this is not what they're offering. The law reads that it has to be in good faith. So you could have a massive delta and not know where you sit within that range because it could be, you know, 100 to 300 and you could be making 120. Who knows? Anyways, the best place to look is market data. We use Pave. If you don't have access to market data, ask a recruiter friend. Wellfound has a salary calculator. That's awesome. But the point is to know your number going in. What is your range? What's your bottom out number? What do you need to do to pay your bills, create savings, and also create maybe like a 6 month safety net? What is that number? That is yours to hold and to understand and know to be true. Have a spreadsheet of companies and ranges that they've said so that you're staying tight and understand the role. So, what is it that you're actually going to be doing? How can you see yourself doing this role? How well are you growing into the role? Are you coming in net normal or are you coming in a little bit more senior so you want to get a little bit more bang for your buck because you're more senior than what it is. Whatever that is, know that and bake that into your number. Know the role and the company before you negotiate. And that means understand the job that you're accepting so that you can only negotiate compensation. And there are a lot of levers that you can play and pull with. But I think the biggest thing to remember is can you do this job? Do you want this job? Do you like job, company, culture, and growth expectations? You're not going to show up to a pile of cash on your desk every day. And that's something that you have to remember. Like, you have to be sold in regardless of compensation. This is just the cherry on top. This is the gas in the car, but you've already picked the car. You know what you're doing, you know the model, everything like that. So, what makes a package? Title, sometimes not flexible, but also a lever that you can pull. Base or salary, bonus or sign on, equity, whether they're RSUs, options, or some other, benefits, perks. Think about an apples to oranges comparison. And my final sort of like, rules for engagement, you have 2 times back and forth with the company before you have to give sort of your best and final answer. Anything more than that as a mid-level or junior person, even sort of a director level, anything director and below, 2 times max, 1 time is perfect, none time, sometimes it works out perfectly and you don't have to negotiate. We wouldn't be on this call if it wasn't the case. All right, with that, let's get into some of our questions. So Dennis asked Rachel, you want me to read it or do you want to read it?
I forgot I muted myself. That was great and gives us a good landscape for the conversation. So, The first question that we have is from Dennis. He asks, how do I initiate that conversation? And his additional question is when negotiating, should I always have my baseline salary in mind, or should I adjust it for the role and company I am applying for? Some companies pay more than others. So how do you navigate that?
Great question, Dennis. I think starting with your first one, how do I initiate the conversation? The first conversation with the recruiter at the beginning of the interview process should be where you start having salary conversations. You could even know what they have in mind based on their job description range. But again, they're in good faith. So it's better to kind of talk to the recruiter. And legally, they're not allowed to ask you, where are you currently in your compensation, or like, what are you making right now? The only thing that they can ask you is, what are your compensation expectations for your next role? And you can answer, okay, well, what are your current ranges? What have you seen on the market? Help me understand. So you can use that as an opportunity to information gather. Check in with the number that you have. So at the beginning of the process, you've stated the internal number. You know what you're looking for based on everything that you've done previous to this. Check in with this number and the recruiter, or the leader who you're working with, to guide you through the process. So do not ask the CEO in the last conversation what your compensation is going to be. That is not a good move. And it's sometimes not even great to do it with the hiring manager. The best person to ask is the recruiter, because you can build that trust with understanding what the ranges are, compensation philosophy, kind of everything that we talked about. The recruiter should be your point person. If it is small enough that they don't have a recruiter, then have that conversation with the hiring manager. Just know they might not be as well versed in negotiating. And sometimes hiring managers get a little prickly with understanding compensation. Anyways, okay, when you have the offer in hand, that's when you initiate negotiations. If you have a pre-close call with a recruiter, which means they're prepping you for an offer, you can have an opportunity to voice your ask, reconfirm the range, and while there might be some surprises, at least you can face them a little bit more head on. And then finally, Dennis, given the fact that should my baseline salary in mind or just okay, so I don't know if I answered this correctly. My notes kind of got a little dislodged, but let's go to this one. For some companies pay more than others. I think you should have a range in mind, which is what I mentioned in terms of knowing your worth. There's also 40 percentile, 50th percentile, all the way up to 100 percentile, what companies pay. That's the range that they're looking at. That's the range that you have in mind. What is your bottom number that you can't pay your bills at? What's the top number that you think would be really nice to have, that you can have maybe a little savings? And that's like 5 to 10K stretch goal. You're not going to walk in as a new grad and ask for 200K. That's not realistic. So, what is realistic for you? Hopefully that helps answer your question, Dennis.
Yeah, I definitely think it will.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Great.
Great, great. I never know if the person who asked the call in the intake form actually makes it
I
until.
know, right?
Oh,
Thanks, Dennis. I'm glad you got the answer.
yeah, me too. So the next question we have is about how to negotiate in this market. So, sort of a timeliness of what candidates are dealing with in this moment. So, in the current job market, Sarah's asking this question. It really feels like any offer is something I should jump at. How can you negotiate while leaving room to back down and accept their initial offer if it's a firm ceiling?
It's a great question, Sarah. And oof, this is the hardest market to be a candidate in. It is a buyer's market, which means companies have their pick. We're seeing upwards of over 100 applications on the day the role is posted. So whether or not they're real people, there's like bots coming out of the woodwork. We're still trying to find the best people for the role. And that means the same rules apply. So you're still needing to go into that process, knowing your value, your worth, your number, and work to understand the why in the number so you have a holistic view of your compensation. So, what is their firm ceiling? Is this something you've known or it's a surprise? I think understanding what you can afford at the very bottom of your range means that you can get excited and jump at something that feels like is their firm offer. You can also have a conversation in the offer call. Is this best and final? And that will give them sort of it will give you an indicator of their cap and also where they might be able to wiggle because base is not the only thing, the only lever that you have to pull. It's the total package, but you have to look at it from apples and oranges and understand what's important to you, not what's important to your fiance who's looking over the equity. What's important to you? And as a recruiter, we actually do ask a lot of times who's going to be helping you make a decision. And that means like, are you going to ask your fiance who's in finance and understands equity and you have no idea? That's fine. What education, what do they need to be educated on to help them get excited and all that jazz? So, how do you negotiate with leaving room to back down? Is there wiggle room? It's kind of as simple as that, and then see what they come back at.
What are some of the levers that they could pull on, like in the case that it's not quite the offer that they were hoping for, but they're still excited about this role and like how they could grow from there? What suggestion might you have for someone who's coming up against a firm offer?
So total package would be title, base and salary, bonus or sign-on, equity, perks and benefits. So do you want a better title for 5K less? Do you want more equity for 10K of, a sign-on bonus and you're not getting your base salary? There's a lot of different areas that companies internally can play with, and it's not something that they're going to give you, they're not going to show all their cards. So
Right.
it's really about being able to build that relationship with the recruiter, hopefully, and then be able to kind of dig in from there.
Nice. Yeah, it's really helpful to hear it in context, what they can do in that moment. Is it a good time to move on to the next question?
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's see what Melissa has.
Great. So, Melissa's asking about negotiating at startups. So, how might you negotiate when a funding round hasn't closed yet? Like they're raising their Series B, but are fuzzy on when and if it will happen.
That's a great question. And honestly, it's tricky because you want to join a growing, exciting environment. We use this saying, you're building the airplane as you fly it 1,000,010 times. And I think it's true because it's like when you start a job and you have vacation planned and you're embarrassed because you have vacation planned, but it's like, no, I had a life prior to this. Like, I'm not gonna not live my life. The same thing with companies. They're growing, they're building, they're doing. So if you have the time to come in, if you have an offer and there are levers that they can pull, I'm going to go back to those levers and knowing your worth. But what's important to you in those levers? Is it base salary? Most startups will add a base increase after a funding round, especially for those late stage folks that are coming in kind of like under the timing. It's not for sure. It's also not guaranteed. So that's a little bit tricky. Are you more interested in equity? Because try to get in before they close the Series A and take a lower base and then figure out what the cost of living adjustments and, you know, um, annual increases look like. Some companies don't have that. And so it's a gamble. Um, but I think if you trust the talent partner, the recruiter that you've been working with, see if they can be transparent. Just you don't know until you ask. And that's kind of the biggest thing. And it's delicate in the way that you ask. It's sort of a fun dance. but you don't know what you don't know until you uncover it. And the worst thing that they can say is, you know what? We're not able to share that information. And then that's the information that you have. So don't be afraid to just not get bullish, but stand up for yourself, advocate a little bit more.
Okay, great. So Chase has a question. How do you navigate the willingness to be a team player but not compromising your value? Which is actually such a broad question.
I know.
Very.
This was one, yeah. Chase, this was a good one. I had a hard time thinking about this one because it's such like a, misnomer to say I'm negotiating my base, but I'm also a team player. I think if you feel comfortable in asking this information, you can understand where the team average is. So, is this a multiple person team where it's an evergreen role where there's 10 AEs? Where do you fall in the average of those? What's the average? Or is this a one-off, in which case you need to know your worth and you need to look at the PAVE market data and understand where you fall into that. But if you are a team player, I think asking the average of the org that you'd be joining helps you get a better understanding. As a team player, you're part of a team and working towards a common goal, obviously, but you're also a culture catalyst. You're bringing cross-functional knowledge and you're helping to raise the bar. So I think really understanding how to be a cultural add, not a cultural fit, a cultural add, and understanding sort of your enthusiasm for the role, but also seeing what the team average looks like gives you a better understanding of how am I supposed to be an individual at a number that I feel excited about amongst a team where I'm a team player. Fair?
I think so.
Okay.
Um, and we have a few questions from Adam. So I'm going to ask these one by one because they're actually
Okay.
pretty different from each other.
Yeah.
So Adam asks, how transparent can you be when asking for compensation ranges during interviews without seeming off-putting? Which I think is such a great question. I think a lot of people don't even know um, what the right tone is to take for these conversations. So any advice you have will be helpful here.
Yeah, I think again, and I'm coming to everyone from a recruiting perspective, so I think recruiters are the easiest ones to talk to about this because they're the ones who will be negotiating your compensation. So if you can't have a frank and honest conversation with a recruiter who essentially doesn't have as much skin in the game as a hiring manager who has to sort of look at all of their team's compensation and help balance if the company is in any type of financial issue. So the recruiter is really looking at this as a net zero ad. So ask your recruiter, and you won't know until you do it whether or not they're going to give that information. I mentioned this before, but in most states, it is illegal not to publish salary information in good faith. So understanding that they might have a massive delta, um, or they could surprise you and work within a range, but just don't look at the top of the range. Understand that there is a range there for a reason. You could be seeing 100 to 200K and think, I'm going to make 200K in this role, and they're coming in at 150. Does that make sense for you? You don't know until you ask. All right, I think we can jump to the second one. This one is meaty.
Okay, great. I'm excited. So Adam asks, if you're pivoting from a larger company to a startup, what's the best way to frame your value to justify a higher compensation package, especially when the startup sees you as expensive?
I'm sorry, Adam. I gotta be blunt here. You are expensive. You're coming from an environment that rewards you for different things than a startup would. And I know that that sounds really cryptic. I don't mean it to be, but You don't have proven startup experience, so there is or can be an adjustment period that sometimes lands in salary ranges. Are you going to walk in and be effective in 90 days if you're building something from scratch? Where a larger organization, you would be impactful in 90 days because you're not building it from scratch. So, in a sense, you're impacting the business faster, so you are worth more. I don't like the way that I answered that, but I guess that's a way to look at it. Um, but again, if you're open to other levers to negotiate title, sign-on, equity, you aren't as expensive. But I think the biggest thing to think about is you're going from an environment that is structured to unstructured. And unstructured environments are inherently risky. And so a risk factor is a lower compensation. And that's how they mitigate risk, I guess is the answer to that. Hopefully that helps, Adam. Rachel, what do you think? How's that answer?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. And it's a question we've gotten a lot. There's seems to be some interest with people leaving bigger companies and going to startups. And I think it's good to just hear a reflection about how it's not just the technical skills might overlap, but the cultural way of working and like the speed at which you must work and how many different departments you must talk to, all those things kind of change at a startup. And so I think you're right about that, like perception of uh, have you proven yourself to be effective in this work scenario? That is yet to be seen. So there's some risk actually. So that makes a lot of sense to me. But I guess just to extend Adam's question is like, if you were a candidate going into that conversation, like what might you um, tell them about that you know, exhibit that they can trust you in those situations, like about their past experiences, even. Does that make sense?
It does. I think you have to prove your experience through the process and hope that they're hiring for competencies as
Mm.
opposed to like STAR or any of the other interview types. You know, and Amazon only does STAR method, but we, for example, hire on competencies and look at behavioral questions of how you are potentially going to perform in the role. This allows you to kind of prove your worth through the process in a sense because you're talking about more realistic experiences, but you never know until you get into the environment whether or not you're going to be successful. So it really is a very tricky, sticky situation. And I think it's more about finding the right environment versus the right compensation package. So the right environment is going to allow you room for growth. It's going to educate and train you in the right way that's going to allow for success. And you have to sort of buy into and drink the Kool-Aid of an organization to get the dividends on the back end with salary increases. The other thing that I always like to tell people is that this is a starting number. You are not going to retire from this job at this number. So while it is a negotiation, and I'm saying all these things about know your worth, and if it's 5 to 10K and it's really going to be an opportunity for you to grow your career, challenge your status quo, learn something new, put that into quantify that. What does that mean to you? How are you looking at your own growth and trajectory? And that is if I want to work at a startup and I only have big experience, I might need to back up to go forward. And that means taking a lateral move, potentially a pay cut to then grow in the right direction.
That makes so much sense. Um, so for Adam's last question, he asks, what are some common red flags in equity offers that candidates might miss, especially at early stage companies?
That's really tricky to answer in all honesty. I did want to keep it on here and I like the question, but equity is very nuanced to each organization. So for some startups, it's less flexible. For earlier stage startups, they're giving away like candy because they have a ton. At SoundCloud, for example, it was a very mature startup, and so we were, well, I won't, never mind. I won't say
That's okay.
yeah, I don't want to go down that path. I realized when I said it, I didn't like it. So I think going back to Adam's question, equity can be flexible, but I think the biggest thing that you need to understand from equity is what is the strike price? What's the current evaluation, which is their 409A? If they're willing to give you what their cap table looks like and what outstanding shares look like, you can then say like how much you have ownership in that company. But the way that I look at equity is like it's a savings account. You're building something for the future. The success of your success will be given back to you by the company if you buy into it. So maybe not a savings account. Maybe that's not the right word, but it's like you're baking the cake and then you put the cherry on top, and that's equity.
Got it. That's great. So we have some live questions. We've got some already in the chat that I think I'm gonna read out. Or I'm gonna actually ask if they'll like to read it out loud. So, Nolan, your question is great. Do you want to read it out loud? I'm happy to read it for you too.
Sure, I could read it. Yeah, I recently moved from New York to Los Angeles. On average, wages are lower. When figuring out your range, what factors should one consider when adjusting for a different geographical area? How do you figure a salary that is realistic for the market you're in, but also something that feels substantial? Yeah, just to elaborate, I was just kind of curious, like what kind of tools you use when figuring out that adjustment.
It's a good question. And it's tricky because cost of living is so, again, subjective in terms of like, what is your rent? What are your groceries? Are you buying for a family of two or a family of six? You know, it varies. Um, there are in PAVE in the market data that I'm talking about, there are tiered cities. So San Francisco, New York, I think are a tier one. Tier two, I believe, is Chicago, Austin, Boston, LA. Tier three is kind of everything else, or Chicago might be in there as well. Either way, I think the way to think about New York to LA is understanding what your cost of living looks like. So, what is your average on a month if you know that? Building off of that, what are you coming from in New York and where was your last compensation? And what have you seen in the local market? Not to complicate things further, but you could also look for remote jobs that don't pay in geo-targeted locations. You could look for, offices, companies that are in San Francisco and you fly up twice a month or whatever the case may be. There's other ways to look at it that could expand and explore more. But I think knowing your worth and knowing LA is going to be the best way. And sometimes it's just having conversations with local agency recruiters and just really getting your name out there and understanding what a local LA market looks like. Does that help, Nolan?
Yeah, that does. Thanks. Appreciate it.
It's not easy and it's a little tricky. And I know going from different regions, it sounds great because you're saving money. You're in LA, it's a cheaper city. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, I'm making 10K less? How did that happen?
Right, right. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Awesome. We have a few other questions that rolled in. Uh, Benjamin, do you want to ask your question out loud?
Sure. Yeah, so going back to, I think it was Adam's second question around going from a larger org to a startup and being potentially unproven in that startup space. I was wondering if a possible lever is around trying to like have like a prove it bonus where you have a specific project deadline. If you meet that, deliverable by that date, is that something that could be a lever as well? Or is this another one of those kind of like, it doesn't hurt to ask type of scenario you were talking about as well?
I think it doesn't hurt to ask, is probably the scenario. However, that I would caution that because there's a lot of risk factors involved in doing like a prove it bonus because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what onboarding looks like. You don't know if you even have the capabilities to get something out the door in 90 days. It varies role by role. So I'm speaking broadly, but help me, like point me in the right direction if you want more specific feedback. But I think for a prove it bonus, the risk factors outweigh the good, and bonuses are taxed up to like 40 to 45%. So you can basically cut that bonus in half and think about what that's your take home versus having it baked into your base salary and just saying like, let's revisit in 6 months to a year. Most startups don't have a cost of living adjustment baked in. That's like comes later. So it's definitely something that everybody is aware of. But I think the prove it bonus is just doing the work and growing your experience. The other thing to think about is 5 years at a startup is like an MBA for a large organization in certain roles, So it's like, it goes back to what I said with this is not where you will be forever. So accept your track back to move forward. It's the same thing as like slow down to speed up, front load all your work and then you can cruise through the process. Like that's kind of how I view negotiating with a large company background. It's a really tough pill to swallow though, because you have experience. You have a lot of experience in certain cases, but it's not the right experience.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a great question. And we have a question from Jan. Do you want to ask this question out loud? I hope I'm saying your name right.
Yep, you did. Yeah, so my question is about, how do you compare the equity to the base? So I'm assuming it's not a dollar for dollar comparison, right? Because the base is guaranteed, the equity may or may not pan out. So I'm just wondering, what kind of are the factors I should look into and how I can kind of value the equity offer, how much more I could increase if, they're not willing to increase the base or go much further on the base.
That's a good question. However, very difficult to answer in sort of a generalist perspective because each company's equity offerings are so different because it's what their evaluation is versus base is tied to the job function or family and specifically what you'll be doing. So equity is company, base is personal and team. So I think the way to max out your base offer is to understand what are you going to be doing in this role? And then to max out the equity, how is the company performing? Or what are they saying? Can you get, I would do research online and see if you can find it. Pave also has that data for equity, which I know I've probably given Pave way too much market cred in this conversation, but it is a tool that I use and it's what I know and it's what I go back to, time and time again. So if you have access to Pave, there is an equity portion. And the way that you can do it is you can see what the percentage is, but I would be careful with equity and negotiating equity with having this made up number in your head. I think getting educated about the equity and where they're flexible will help you get the max equity. But I recognize that this is a conversation on negotiating, and equity is sort of like that black box.
Got it. Thank you.
I'll also try to, I know that we have, at some point, somebody gave me an equity calculator that is actually really helpful to give you a perspective on what they might even be telling you during the negotiations. And I'll try to find that and send it with our follow-up email, just in case it's helpful when you encounter those numbers. Because, it can be hard to wrap your head around, especially in a conversation live. Like that's something hopefully you get. I don't know if this is something you'd recommend, Hillary, but like something you'll take with you during that first negotiation call and sit down with and like think through for a minute. I think you'll get that moment to get some perspective on the amounts that you're looking at, because it's just confusing actually.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very specific. Carta is another really great tool to do. I know they have an equity calculator, and most startups use Carta for their equity sort of capture. I don't know what the terminology is for that, but anyways, Carta is a great place to check things out, and it's a great how-to guide on equity if you're new to it.
Oh, that's a great tip. So those were the questions that were in the chat. Does anyone want to ask any questions out loud? I also have more of our intake questions that I can read from. You can use the hand wave icon in the bottom toolbar if you have any questions, or you can write them in the chat if you want me to ask them out loud. I'm gonna sit awkwardly waiting.
Does anybody have any offers they're currently negotiating?
Oh, good. Okay, I'm gonna. Adam says wishful thinking.
Yeah.
We are all wishful thinking. Let me see. Let me look at the questions that we have pulled.
I can tell a story. This week, I lost a candidate because I overplayed my negotiation hand and they declined the offer, and it was a lot of my learning.
So what did you learn? Like what maybe they could get a takeaway from the other side.
Yeah, so the candidate was very transparent in compensation, and they happened to be, it's an evergreen role, which means there's multiple individuals. Does everybody know what an evergreen role is? Where you keep it open, not on nonstop, and it's like one of those teams like client success or account executives where you just like you have a profile and then you find the right people, and it's sort of like that team always grows.
Mm.
Uh, so it was an evergreen role, and we have a tight turnaround on our band, which means that the person was asking technically like 3K over our max, but we wanted to keep everything tight with the team. So the candidate was very transparent in their wish, and we tried to kind of undersell, and it didn't end up working out.
Oh no, just for a 3K difference. And yeah, that's
Well, that tells you that there's other reasons that they weren't going to be a fit for the role. And that's why I like candidates. I always recommend know what your number is going into it and ask for it. And you know what? This person did, and it didn't work out for this time, but I appreciate that they stood strong for 3K.
well, the question I have highlighted here was, can you negotiate slightly above a listed range, or should you really treat it as the max? So I feel like your answer is sort of both and. It's like,
Yeah,
really know what your limit is, and maybe that person wasn't meant to work in that role because it might not have sustained them actually.
yeah,
But the other hand, it didn't work out because they wouldn't budge, or they went above that listed range. So I don't know
yeah.
if you have any other thoughts on that.
I think it depends. It kind of goes back to, I don't remember whose question it was. I think Chase, in terms of team player, it's understanding, is this an evergreen rec, which means are there multiple and they're just looking for good individuals that can fill this role, and the team will grow to 10, let's say. Um, oh, that's my buzzer. We're just gonna keep going and ignore the door. So I think it depends on if it's an evergreen rec. It depends on your experience and it depends on your relationship with the organization. Do you have, are you a referral? Are you coming in from an investor? Are you coming in from a portfolio company? Like, what's your route? Did they source you on LinkedIn? That gives you a little bit more leg up. If you apply directly, you have less likelihood of going above the range than you would if I listed all those other things. But that's not to say that you can't. You just have to prove your worth, to know your why.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's nice to hear that put in perspective about like how are you coming into the conversation? Like how did you get on the call to begin with? That's really interesting. We have another question from Sean here that I thought might be helpful. And he asks, what's the first question you ask when negotiating your compensation? In my experience, I get shut down anytime I try to approach the conversation. So this is a question I kind of wanted to ask in general, which is like, what's your recommended timeline in approaching compensation during the screening process? You talked about it a little bit, and then like, how do you bring it up? Like maybe you've got some, because if he's getting shut down, I wonder if he's doing something that maybe is throwing people off, or maybe it's
Yeah.
a timing thing.
I mean, compensation gets people squirrely, full stop. But that's why I like having conversations about comp with recruiters because that's what we do. Also, I will give you clarity. Agency recruiters are getting a take home, a percentage of your base salary. In-house recruiters may or may not have a bonus tied to you. So that can sometimes tell you where the recruiter's sort of like interests lie. Um, Going back to Rachel, repeat the question or drop it in the slide just so I can.
Yeah, you dropped it.
I lost the plot on that one.
That's all good. Basically, the question is, what's the first
Yes.
question you ask when negotiating compensation? And he explains that he gets shut down every time he tries to approach the conversation. So, really, just advice on how to approach it.
So, your first question to ask when negotiating your compensation should be, tell me about the range for this role. And then see what they say. What are you looking for in terms of compensation? Technically, they don't have to say their number first, but neither do you. So, if I were unsure of my compensation range, I would say I just have a couple. Well, again, I'm coming from this from a recruiter perspective, so let me put myself in candidate role. Um, Before we hop off the call, I just have a couple of logistical comments to make. I want to talk about compensation and I want to talk about start date, location, insert anything, just don't have it only be compensation. Because that gives you an opportunity to think, I'm covering all my bases. The logistics queen. I got to figure this out. When you have the offer in hand, we present to you the opportunity to join us as an account executive. You're coming in at 150,000. This is so exciting. I'm so excited about this opportunity. That 150, when we discuss in our conversation, because remember, this isn't the first time you've had a salary conversation. I was hoping for 160. Explain to me why I'm not there, or help me understand how to get to 160. How far away are we from the number that I asked? Sometimes you can get through, and sometimes you can get a solid recruiter to kind of help you with that. But getting shut down in conversations, I think, is the sign of maybe a bad recruiter. And is this an environment that you want to work in? You're still interviewing when you're negotiating, which means you have to be careful and they have to be careful.
Yeah, very interesting. So it sounds like it helps a bit to make the question a bit more open-ended and less demanding. Like to use, I don't, there's probably a better word that I could be using there, but it sounds like your phrasing there is sort of like, how do we work together to figure out how to get me closer to what my objective was, or give me some perspective on it. And I love that because I think a lot of people forget that recruiters are really on your side. Like they don't want to keep hunting for the role. They want to make the fit. They want to make it work. They're on your side and maybe they've got a bonus or maybe they don't, but they still want to make sure that they're getting the right person in that role. And if you're at the offer stage, they probably really have stakes in and making it work for you if they can. So I like that a collaborative kind. I don't know if that's what you're saying, but that's sort of my takeaway is a bit of
No,
a collaborative approach.
yes, that's a great summarization, Rachel. Thank you.
Yeah, very cool. And really helpful to hear about. I guess the other question that kind of is an extension of this is about like timeline. Like it sounds like when you first have an approaching call, you will have like a more broad conversation about the compensation band, and then you really wait until the offer, if I'm getting that right. You wait until the offer stage to revisit it.
Sort of. I think having a constant check-in on compensation is the safest game to play. I think understanding where you are and also where you can grow helps. I don't know if that helps answer.
Definitely, yeah. And we have another question from Jason in the chat. Jason, do you want to read this out loud? It's a great question.
Sure. Something I've seen and struggled with before is compensation reviews being forgotten or neglected. And I'm wondering if it's a best practice from a employee standpoint to have something defined in the offer letter versus sort of a cavalier handshake deal. And then if so, is it off-putting to be the one to sort of push for that review when the time comes versus letting your superior manager, whoever, be the one to initiate that discussion?
That's a great question. I think majority of startups don't have compensation reviews clearly defined. So they're not going to put it in an offer letter full stop. They're not going to hold themselves accountable to something that they may or may not be able to follow up with. For specific metrics and timeframes and things like that, startups want as much flexibility as possible. When the time comes, it is necessary for the employee to push for a review, but also have an understanding of like company performance, team performance, personal performance, because all of those factors are going to be whether or not you're seeing an incremental increase. But I think the biggest thing to do is to stay tight with your manager when it comes to compensation reviews. But that gets a little bit tricky. And I know that I've said multiple times that you're not going to stay at this number when negotiating your compensation. So that is important. But there's also a level of trust that goes into it. They're trusting you to do the job, and you're trusting them to grow your career, but neither is, both are dependent of each other. Does that help answer your question, Jason? I don't know if that is round enough.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's just coming from switching from more of the corporate world to sort of the startup world is just a different shift in understanding how they evaluate their needs, I guess.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing in terms of transitioning from corporate to startup is ambiguity and lack of structure. And that's something that you kind of just have to let go and let God and work towards it and stay close with your people team to help push things forward.
Makes sense.
That was a great question and so helpful to hear about, you know, and highlight how startups are different culturally, and that's just sort of part of the situation. Austin has a question. Do you want to ask it out loud, Austin?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, kind of last minute. Um, kind of another in this market question, especially when, let's say you're trying to do a career change, just kind of trying to get your foot in the door, more or less take anything you can get. Is it really the worst they can say is no, it's no big deal kind of thing if you were to ask for more, kind of toward the end? Have you ever seen a situation maybe where you had a candidate who was going to receive an offer and they kind of, were like, well, let me just see if I can get a little more, and they ask, and then their offer was rescinded based on that request, even though they would have taken the initial offer? Does that make sense?
It does. I wouldn't say that companies will rescind your offer, but it definitely leaves a bad taste in their mouth when you kind of like throw them a curveball and it's like, but it depends. Everything is dependent on how much you're asking, what your relationship is with your hiring manager, hiring team, recruiter, etc. Is it a make or break? Like, are you not going to accept the offer if you don't get your ask? But you also can't really play that card because then they're not going to give you the comp increase. So it really is a gamble, and you kind of have to go with your gut on understanding like, if I ask this, this could burn a bridge. I can't see a company rescinding an offer because, to Rachel's point, you don't want to then go through an entire interview process again and try to bring someone else through when you have a great candidate that just wanted a little bit more money. So there's kind of two sides. So it really is the way that your relationship is and also how you play it in that moment. So bullish, not good, soft, okay. It's really about it's exploration. You're on an exploratory conversation as opposed to, if I don't get this, I will not accept.
Thank you.
Yeah. So style. That's my final style.
Nice. I guess that's that collaborative spirit too. Conversational. That makes so much sense to me, and also like not surprising anyone. I think that probably that curveball is probably the worst case scenario. I'm guessing. I can't imagine doing that, but
It happens. It
I'm sure,
happens.
I'm sure that it happens. Especially when people are so nervous to talk about compensation that you might leave it till the very end instead of talking about it earlier. But maybe it's helpful that we all have talked about it a little bit now with Hilary's help, to kind of destigmatize how it goes on both ends, I think is so helpful. So yeah, it's almost the end of the session. So before we go, I just want to point out that we do have a Discord now. We have a profile level up resume review area in their channel. It's still really in its infancy, the Discord, but anyone who wants to pop in there, wants some feedback on their resume, I've been personally writing responses to those when I can during the week. So I encourage you to do so. And you can also introduce yourselves to other job seekers and recruiters who are in there. And then if people have a chance, it would be great to have you fill out our survey. Alejandro's going to pop it in the chat right now just to hear how the session went. We're experimenting a little bit with some formats of Ask a Recruiter. We're going to have a panel coming up soon, and something that's more focused like on just like job seeking and like searching for jobs in a few weeks. But I'm open to ideas about what formats these can take, and any feedback on how this session went will help me, improve these in the future. So please feel free to write in there. And then lastly, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much, Hilary. This was such a great session. I learned so much. I hope everyone else learned a lot too. I'm going to be sending a follow-up email to everyone who's joined and anyone who wasn't able to join as well, with a video recording of this session, as well as like an article that we're going to, sort of surmise Hilary's points here to try to make it into like a good bite-size piece of information for you to carry with you as hopefully and wishful thinking we all get to those offer stages in your job seeking journey. So anything you guys ever need, write to us at talent@wellfound.com. And thank you again, Hilary. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you all for all your participation. It was great.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Ready to find your next role or discover top talent? Visit us at wellfound.com.